Shalom, everybody. Good to see everybody. I hope everybody's had a good week. Nice, cool weather we're having, and it's just a blessing. If you mention the name Korach, the word rebellion just almost immediately comes to mind, does it not? It was a rebellion that led to the earth opening its mouth and swallowing people, and fire coming forth from Yehovah and consuming 250 men, 251. Leaders of Israel, men of name, rebellion. This rebellion played out in a parsha for the man who orchestrated the rebellions. It's named after him, Korach ben Yitzhar ben Kohath, a Levite, and his spans numbers are Bamidbar 16:1 through 18:32. And we're going to examine a little bit about this rebellion times 3 or 4. Korach was a grandson of Kohath, the Levitical tribe, tasked with the responsibility of transporting the Ark of the Covenant, the menorah, the table of showbread, the 2 altars, and all of their utensils. A very prestigious task, a very prestigious job among the children of Israel. And they did this whenever Yehovah led Israel to break camp and move. Yet, despite this appointment, Korach wasn't satisfied with what Yehovah had given him and his brothers to do. He wanted the priesthood that had been given to Aharon and his sons, even though it was Yehovah who had made the decisions. It was Yehovah who had assigned the Levites to their positions. Can you imagine somebody not being satisfied with what Yehovah had given them? Grumbling and complaining against the Almighty because they didn't get their way. Heaven forbid. Korach faced a major problem, though, and that was Moshe. Moshe was so respected as a leader of the people of Israel that he or nor anyone dared challenge him. And it was only after the 10 of the men who returned from exploring the land had convinced the people that they were not able to go in to take the land away from those giants and people in the land, that he began to see his opportunity to go against Moshe. I mean, after all, the people had rebelled against Yehovah's command, and so now that generation had learned Yehovah would not allow them to cross over and inherit the land, they began to grumble and complain against Moshe and Aharon. And they said, let us appoint a leader and let us turn back to Mitzrayim. And here was Korach's chance to seize the priesthood from Aharon and his sons. Only he had another problem. He wanted Aharon's position, not Moshe's. He wanted the priesthood. He didn't care about the overall leadership of Israel. He wanted to be the one to bring the incense before Yehovah. He wanted to be the one that tended to the menorah and trimmed its lamps and all the other responsibilities given to the high priest. Now, he found the solution to his problem in some of the grandsons of Reuben, Dathan and Abiram. These 2 Reubenites were not at all satisfied with the way Moshe had been leading the children of Israel. So Korach instigated actually 2 rebellions in one. One against Moshe's position as the leader of Israel, and the other against Aharon, the man Yehovah had chosen to be the Kohen Gadol, the high priest of the priesthood. Now, reading the accounts of these 2 rebellions presents a classic example of one's desire, let's say, clouding his judgment when it comes to obeying Yehovah. And it also not only clouds his judgment, it overrides Yehovah's word. As Korach approached Moshe that afternoon, he played off of the people's discontent. He openly told Moshe they had had enough of him and his brother. After all the congregation of Israel is Kodesh. It is all of us are set apart. Every one of them. Why should Moshe and Aharon be above all the rest of the assembly? And Moshe's response was classic Moshe. He fell on his face and he spoke to Korach. But Moshe didn't speak to Korach from a position of submissiveness or weakness. He spoke with authority. How can Moshe or any man or woman speak with authority? You speak the words of Elohim. That's the authority you have. If it's not the word of Elohim, you're on somebody else's authority, and there are people like you in the world would challenge somebody that doesn't speak with the authority of Elohim, which is a good thing. Right? Wrong? Aren't we supposed to test the spirits? Aren't we supposed to, anything a man teaches, we're supposed to go back and line it up with the word of Elohim to make sure it's right? Because if you don't, guess what? You'll wind up celebrating some other feast days besides his and eating things that you think is all right that aren't. You have to test the spirits. You have to try the word to see if what that person, that teacher is telling you is correct. So he told Korach and those following him that the next morning they were to bring their fire holders, put incense on them before Yehovah, and all the congregation would know whom Yehovah had chosen for the priesthood of Israel. Now there were so many ways Moshe could have chosen for Yehovah to make known whom he had chosen. But this one carried not only an opportunity, but a warning for Korach and those following him. It was a warning to repent and turn back from their sins. Remember Nadab and Abihu? And what had happened to them? They died for bringing strange fire before Yehovah, and theirs had not been an act of open rebellion. So do you think when Moshe chose this way, or perhaps Yehovah told Moshe to choose this way, he was sending a message to Korach and those people? You better think about what you're doing. Remember what happened before when people who were not authorized to try to do something, what Yehovah, his answer was. So Moshe chastised the Levites for not being satisfied with their positions he had chosen for them. And then he turned his attention to Dathan and Abiram. He called for them, but they refused to come up, openly defying Moshe's place as leader of Israel. And he wasn't just any leader. He was an appointed leader, appointed by Yehovah, and they said, nah, we're not coming up. They accused Moshe of bringing them into the wilderness to kill them. They accused him of delivering them from Egypt and bringing him out in the wilderness to kill them. I wonder how they explained how Moshe had caused all the plagues in Egypt. And if they believed Moshe was the cause of all the plagues, why weren't they afraid to challenge him? I mean, if Moshe did all this just to bring them out in the wilderness to kill them, don't you think they should have been worried long before now? Sometimes men's thinking just doesn't make any sense at all, does it? Now, having failed to kill them in the wilderness, now they accuse Moshe of wanting to seize total reign over them. You couldn't kill us, so now you're just going to try to reign over us completely. I mean, after all, they had given Moshe his chance, and he had failed to bring them in the land of their inheritance, so now they were not going to come up to him and recognize him as leader anymore. It's amazing as you read about this incident and realize how weak and foolish the arguments of men are when they try to justify rebelling against Yehovah and his word. I mean, think of some of the things people say in our world today for not obeying Yehovah. None of them hold water. But some of the things people come up to justify what they're doing is kind of strange. But for Moshe and Korach and all the rest, the next day was shaping up to be quite a day. The next morning, Moshe dealt with both rebellions, Korach and the 250 leaders of the congregation, as well as Dathan and Abiram. But there was a third rebellion going on at the same time. And it's one that is seldom mentioned in traditional teachings. What was the third rebellion? Pay close attention to chapter 16, verses 20 through 21. And Jehovah spoke to Moshe and to Aaron, saying, Separate yourself from the midst of the congregation, and let me consume them in a moment. But they fell on their faces and said, O Elohim of the spirits of all flesh, when one man sins, are you wroth with all the congregation? Jehovah wasn't planning on just taking care of Dathan and Abiram. He wasn't planning on taking care of just Korach and the 250 men who joined him. He was angry with the entire congregation. He was going to say, I'll consume them and start over with you. And this is not the first time he had told Moshe this. Remember the sin with the golden calf? When he told Moshe to move aside? O Elohim of the spirits of all flesh, when one man sins, are you wroth with all the congregation? And herein lies a very, very valuable lesson for the children of Israel. When some of Israel rebels and sins against Jehovah, and the rest of the congregation remains silent, Jehovah holds the entire congregation responsible if they simply stand by and remain silent. If there is sin going on among our people, and we don't rise up to stop it and to challenge it, he's angry with the entire congregation. And when some of the children of Israel rebel against Jehovah's appointed leaders, he holds the entire congregation responsible as well if they stand and remain silent. We are a people split into two houses because of stuff like this. And a house divided, if it can't stand, guess what else it can't do? It cannot do what Jehovah has called us to do. We're too weak. We have got to be united in heart, mind, and spirit. We've got to be cleansed with the blood of a Passover lamb that is so perfect, so stainless, that it can wash all of our sins away, cleanse us and restore us to our right standing with our Father, and then we are going to do what? Divide ourselves along traditional lines, the teaching of this man or this rabbi or that rabbi, and we're going to split and divide. We have worked really hard over the last 2,000 years to undo what the Messiah came to do, and that was unite us. And our adversary is having a much easier time than he ever dreamed possible, I would imagine. Jehovah was pleased with Moshe and Aharon's plea for the people who were not openly rebelling against him. But he called on everyone to move away from the tents of Korach, Dathan and Abiram. And when he did, even some of Korach's own children moved away from their father. We know that from Bamidbar chapter 26, verse 11, because some of the sons of Korach didn't die in this rebellion. Then, so there would be no question about who was bringing judgment against the rebels, Moshe made this announcement. If these die as all men do, or if they are visited as all men are visited, then Jehovah has not sent me. But if Jehovah creates, bara, something out of nothing, something never been seen before, what is unheard of, and the earth opens its mouth and swallows them up and all that belongs to them, and they do go down alive into Sheol, then you shall know that these men have scorned Jehovah. And what happened next removed almost, but not all, doubt and rebellion in the people's minds. The earth did open up and swallow those men and all that they had, and they did go down into Sheol alive, and there they perished. And as this happened, Fire came out from Yehovah and consumed the 250 men in Korach who were burning incense before Yehovah. And Moshe commanded to take their fire holders and make a covering for the altar of slaughterings as a remembrance for the rebellion of the children of Israel. No stranger, the word there is zur, a layman, who is not of the seed of Aharon should come near to offer the incense before Yehovah. I want you to look very closely at verse 37 of chapter 16. Very closely. Yehovah commanded Moshe to send Eleazar ben Aharon to pick up the fire holders out of the midst of the blaze. Out of the midst of the blaze. Eleazar was sent to go in and collect the fire pans of the 250 men whose bodies were still burning. They didn't die the exact same death as Nadab and Abihu, whose bodies were still intact after their deaths. Imagine having to walk among burning bodies to collect their fire pans. But the rebellions were over, at least until the next morning. The next morning, all the congregation of the children of Israel grumbled against Moshe and Aharon, accusing them of killing the people of Yehovah. Now, if you're in the Hebrew text, chapter 17 actually begins at chapter 16, verse 36. It's in the English text, to see if you're keeping up. Their continued rebellion once again roused Yehovah's anger, and once again he called on Moshe and Aharon, "Arise from the midst of the congregation and let me consume them in a moment." If I stop right here, and I'm not, but if I did, what would be one lesson that you could reliably take away from the Midrash so far? He gets mad when we rebel against him and his word. I mean, he gets really mad. There's consequences. He gets angry at his people. Well, why didn't he wipe out the rest of the world then? I mean, after all, if Israel rebels, why not go against all the Gentile nations and wipe all of them out? Now, they're rebelling even more than Israel did. Except for a time or two when he said, well, Israel, you're worse than the nations. We're in covenant with him. We have made the decision that he means more to us than anything in the world. And we've obeyed the command to come out of the world and come into covenant with him. And we have said, whatever Yehovah says, we will do and obey. We have said, yes, Yahushua of Nazareth is our Messiah. He is the Son of Elohim. He is our atoning sacrifice. And we're going to enter into covenant and be sprinkled with his blood, and we're going to walk as he walked. And the rest of the nations haven't entered into that covenant yet. But for those of his children who are in covenant with him, he holds us to a higher level of responsibility. I grew up working with my dad in construction. And we had a crew. But guess who he was harder on than everybody else in that crew? His two sons. He expected us to work harder, longer, and do more than anybody else on that crew. Taught me a valuable lesson. When I came into my father's covenant, I knew to expect my father to expect more out of me than he did people that weren't in covenant with him. And did not the Messiah teach us that to whom much is given, less is required? Oh, what was it? To whom much is given, much more is required. You want to come out of this world and be a light to the nations? Then you better snuff your own light out and reflect his. The nations doesn't need any more of me. The nations need the truth of his word, and they need the Messiah. And I forgot where I was. Oh, well, let me go back to start. Okay, just mention the word. Oh, I won't go back quite that far. Now, The next morning there was a rebellion. They accused him of killing all the people. He said, "Arise from the midst of this congregation. Let me consume them in a moment." Again he said that. And Moshe and Aharon again responded as true leaders. They fell on their faces before Yehovah to intercede. Now Yehovah accepted their intercession, but not completely accepted. Instead of consuming the people in a moment, he sent a plague upon the people, and the plague moved at a pace that by the time Aharon had collected his fire holder, placed incense on it, and ran out into the midst of the people, standing between the living and the dead, 14,700 people died. And this was besides those who died on account of Korach and his rebellion. So it wasn't in a moment, but something started, and what happened? Aaron had to go stop it. He had to go stand between people and death. Now, he was Aaron. That was the Levites. We're just Israelites. We're just a nation of priests. Should be a lesson in there somewhere for us. After Israel was commanded to stone the man found in gathering sticks on the Sabbath to death, Yehovah gave him the commandments regarding the tzitzits that we wear on our garments. Somewhere, there they are. They remind us to guard and do all of his commandments. Kol, all. Don't leave any of them out, including wearing the tzitzits. And now, after Korach's rebellion, he again gave Israel a reminder of the effects of rebellion. In chapter 17, Moshe was commanded to gather one staff, matef, from each of the 12 tribes. Each staff was to have the name of the tribe written on it, with Aharon's name also on the staff of the tribe of Levi. They were placed in the tent of appointment before the witness. And when the staffs were brought out the next day, what happened? Come on. We stop sometimes with we stop sometimes. Well, his rod budded. Wasn't that great? No, it did more than just budded. It brought forth buds, blossomed, and bore ripe almonds all in one morning. Pretty miraculous, isn't it? They took it in there one day, the next morning they brought it out, and it's got ripe almonds on it. How long does it take an almond tree to produce almonds and get them ripe for the picking, the gathering? Longer than a day. Of course, this was the staff of Levi, which Aharon's name written on it. Was this the same staff that swallowed up the staffs of Pharaoh's magicians? If you go back and look at Shemot 7:12, that was Aharon's staff, so we don't know. Interesting. The staff was placed back before the witness to be kept as a sign against the rebels, so that you put an end to their grumblings against Yehovah, lest they die. Unfortunately, it wouldn't be long before Moshe would need this. He attempted to use the rod almost 38 years later to quell the people's rebellion at a place called Meribah. Of course, bringing the rod out wasn't enough. It took water to stop their grumbling and complaining. Would his staff work today? Would just seeing Aharon's staff with those ripe almonds stop people's murmuring and complaining about their poor lot in life? Consider the lessons of this week's Haftorah. Shmuel reminded the people that Yehovah is a witness against us when we sin. He delivered our ancestors from Mitzrayim, and they forgot him. How could you forget him when you're looking at that cloud of fire, pillar every day? But they forgot his ways. Oh, they remembered him, they just forgot his ways. Oh yeah, there he is, he's Elohim, But we can forget some of this. So he sold them into the hands of Sisera, then in the hands of the Philistines, and then into the hands of the Moabites, and then in the hands of the Greeks, Romans. So it went on and on and on. And each time as Israel cried out in repentance, Jehovah sent teachers, leaders, deliverers to them. Zerubbabel, Baden, Yiftach, Shmuel, Messiah. Of course, as time went by, Israel was given into the hands more and more of the Gentiles, which required more and more deliverers and judges. And now they were demanding a king. A king like the other nations, even though Jehovah was their king. Imagine, we have a king that's like no other king on the face of the earth. And what did our forefathers want? A king like every other king. Wow. Our king never made a bad decision, never lost a war, never mistreated his people, and we wanted a king that would do just the opposite. And we got it. A king like no other nation will ever have or ever has had. We have Jehovah Elohim, El Shaddai, the Elohim of Abraham, Yitzchak, Yaakov, and a father of our Messiah. He is our king. And then in 1 Samuel chapter 12, verses 20 through 22, and then 24 through 25, Jehovah gives guidance to Israel that we should heed today better than our forefathers heeded. Do not fear. You have done all this evil. Only do not turn aside from following Jehovah. And you shall serve Jehovah with all of your heart, and do not turn aside after worthless matters which do not profit or deliver, for they are worthless. For Jehovah would not cast away his people for his great name's sake, seeing it has pleased Jehovah to make you his people. It has pleased our Father to make us his people. Now, most of the world would look at our group and say, oh, right. But our Father looked at us and said, yeah, right. I've chosen these because they've chosen me. They've chosen to enter into covenant with me. They're going to come out of the world and stand for me. These are my kind of people. Only fear Jehovah, and you shall serve him in truth with all of your heart. Truth being the sum of his word, not the sum of man's word. For consider what marvels he has done for you. But if you persist in doing evil, both you and your sovereign are consumed. And many years later, after the messenger of Jehovah had released Kepha and some of the other emissaries from the jail, the Sadducees, and had put them in, the messenger of Jehovah told Kepha, go and stand in the set-apart place. Wait a minute. And speak to all the people all the words of this life. Well, that's what got him in jail in the first place, wasn't it? And he's saying, go back and do it again. But notice what he said. Speak to the people all the words of this life. What did he mean, this life? The life they were living in? The life of that era? Or the life that we have promised to us when we have the testimony of Messiah and guard the commandments of Elohim? That's a life he was trying to tell everybody about. Because the world was teaching them a different story. The world was not telling them the truth. The Sadducees didn't even believe in a resurrection. And so the messenger of God set them out of prison and said, go back and do exactly what you were doing that got you put in prison, and tell them about this life that's promised to you. This life, the life of guarding the commandments of Jehovah and having the testimony of Messiah Yehoshua, and they did exactly that. This life. Now, he didn't say that life that is to come, or the life that is to come. He said this life, the life we can have right now. The life of walking in covenant with our Father, sealed in the blood of his Son. The life that says, I set before you today life and blessings, death and curses. You choose which one you want. We'll get back to you. Of course, this resulted in their being brought back before the same men who had put them in prison the first time, the Sanhedrin, the council as it's called there, and the Kohen Gadol, the high priest. They asked the emissaries, now hadn't you been commanded not to teach in this name? It's funny how they didn't want to pronounce his name. Think they were scared of it? Haven't we commanded you not to teach in this name? Which to Kepha and the others replied, we have to obey Elohim rather than men. This was Kepha's second time to stand before the Kohanim and the Sadducees. Earlier, he and some of the others had been arrested for teaching the people and telling them about the Messiah's resurrection. At that time, they had also been commanded not to speak at all or to teach in the name of Yehoshua. And when this command was given, Kepha and Yochanan responded, telling the council, whether it is right in the sight of Elohim to listen to you more than to Elohim, you judge. For it is impossible for us not to speak what we saw and heard. That's the heart and the mind that we must have in today's world. We've got to have the same courage, the same steadfastness, the same faith, which all comes from trusting that what our Father has told us from the beginning is true, and that He will not fail us. We have to stand up and tell anyone, because people out there are teaching a different message than we teach here, on both sides. And we have to be able to stand up and say, what is it right in the sight of Elohim? Should we listen to you or to Elohim? And we should have the heart. It is impossible for me to speak of anything other than Messiah and Torah. And when we get that heart and that mind and we realize the covenant we have, and it's not just the covenant we have, because a covenant is no stronger than the person that gives it. And when we realize who we are in covenant with, El Shaddai, the creator of everything, and His Son, then who are we going to listen to? And what else can we say except what they give us to say? Our readings this Shabbat emphasize an important characteristic of the children of Israel. We are a stiff-necked people. I think he mentioned that once or twice in his word, did he not? The thing is, being stiff-necked can be either a vice or a virtue. When we are stiff-necked and rebel against Yehovah, His Messiah, and His Torah, it is a vice that leads to suffering and destruction. But when we turn from sin and we become stiff-necked in our observance of His commandments and in emulating the life of our Messiah, then being stiff-necked becomes a virtue. When we refuse to be turned to the right or the left, we got a neck so stiff that all we're doing is we're looking for that narrow path the Messiah came, and we're wanting to enter in through that one door, and we refuse to look right or left, but we're so stiff-necked we following Him. No matter what the world or anybody else says, it becomes a virtue. In fact, as some have proclaimed, Israel has survived because we are a stiff-necked people. We just have to be stiff-necked to follow the way of Elohim, not the way of the world. And I'm going to close with a quote from the author of the book of Hebrews. Actually, two quotes. Today, if you hear His voice, do not harden your hearts. Stiffen your neck, but don't harden your hearts. He was quoting from Psalm Tehillim 95, 6 through 11. Come, let us bow down and bend low. Let us kneel before Yehovah our Maker, for He is our Elohim, and we are the people of His pasture and the sheep of His hand. Today, if you would hear His voice, Do not harden your hearts as at Meribah, and as in the day of Massah in the wilderness, when your fathers tried me, have proved me, though they saw my work. For 40 years I was grieved with that generation, and said, they are a people who go astray in their hearts, and they do not know my ways, as I have sworn in my wrath, if they enter into my rest. And then it stops right there. How would you end that psalm? If they would enter into my rest, what? We would find rest. We would find relief. We would find forgiveness and pardon for our sins. We would find a loving master, a loving father who would bring us in and heal our hurts, strengthen us, give us his word, and say, now, that world that you came out of that was so rough and tough on you, I want you to go back into it. But this time, no, I am with you. Even when he is angry with us because of our sin and rebellion, he offers us pardon. He offers us his grace, his forgiveness, if we will turn from sin back to him and enter into his rest. So I want to invite you today to join a stiff-necked people, but a people who have not hardened our hearts to his Messiah or his word. A people who are learning to be stiff-necked the right way. And as I was closing this out, he kind of said something to me. He said, be as energetic and committed to serving Yehovah and living as a Messiah lived, or even more so, as you were about the things you loved and pursued when you were in the world. And I kind of thought about one or two of the things that I did that I really just poured my heart and soul into because I loved it. As crazy as it may have been, it was like, yes. And I mean, I found the gear that I needed to do it the best too, and I had, and I worked hard at it. And I mean, if there's something new that came out that would help me do a better job at whatever I was doing, I was going to save the money and buy it. I mean, I was going to pour all I had into doing what I loved. And the Father said, now if you'll take that kind of energy and that kind of love and devotion, and you were willing to put up with all the broken parts and busted bones and everything else and jump up and smile and keep right on doing it, if you will take that heart and apply it to serving me, imagine what can happen. So yeah, come on and join a bunch of stiff-necked people with open hearts and love, not only for our Father, but for each other. Okay? And you want a challenge? Loving the Father is kind of easy. It's really a relief. It's really pretty awesome to love the Father. Loving the Messiah, oh man, look, yeah, loving each other. There are challenges in this world. You don't have to go looking for them. There are also blessings of loving each other. The blessings of forgiving each other. And being there for each other, because we've all been down many of the same roads. Only the Father could have put together a people like this. Stiff-necked but open-hearted. With that, I'm going to say, Shabbat Shalom. And I'm going to add